The one thing I'll say is having had a front row seat to the industry is that as much as you hear leaders saying, "Oh, we're months away from AGI," or, "Look at what these autonomous agents are doing." I would argue we have a little time. We don't have infinite time.
Sure.
And, I think the events of this week with DeepSeek showing how much they were able to accomplish with a lot less compute and, resource constrained, however you want to view what they're telling us versus what might be reality. The fact is that it is accelerating. There's a horizon that is at least visible where we really will have to consider the implications of AI systems that are acting completely without human input. But we do have a little time. I often say, in some ways, when you consider the grand history of technology, and my history major coming back, we're closer to the very immature phases of AI than we are to the mature ones. That is still on the long view, which means that it's kind of up to us, right?
Mhm.
Like, this is the time to be talking about these things and to not shy away from it.
You're listening to This Week in No Code plus AI, with weekly episodes sharing the latest advancements of AI, plus exclusive interviews with founders using these tools. So without any further ado, let's get started. Welcome to This Week in No Code plus AI. I'm your host, JJ Engler. We have another great show for you this week. We have another interview with the CEO and co-founder of a privacy-focused AI company that's going to help you get the information that you need while keeping it accurate and locked tight. But before we get into that interview, I want to talk to you a little bit about what happened this week in No Code and AI. The big news of the week being a DeepSeek, a new reasoning that came out of China, quickly ran up to the number one app downloaded in the app stores, being used in all different areas of life. Even Microsoft has adopted them into the suite of Azure products. It's a great new model, mostly being because it's so cheap, but still performing at similar expectations of OpenAI's O1 model. So really good performance, but at like a tenth of the cost. It is open source, but it is based out of China. And there's a lot of things that come with this, right? It's like, first off, I don't think the industry thought that a model at this scale and this level could be introduced for less than hundreds of millions of dollars. And reports are that DeepSeek has only used about $5 to $6 million to train and do this model. And they have been able to train this model in new ways that could lead us to innovation. But with that being said, I don't think anyone was really expecting a player like this to just take the industry by storm. So that's interesting and will keep this industry competitive, which is important for everybody. But it's also going to encourage more innovation, some good, some bad. Sam Altman from OpenAI was essentially saying, hey, we'll push some of our releases forward now to compete with this. We will reduce some pricing to compete with this. A lot of those things are happening. One thing to note about DeepSeek is it is open source. So you're able to use it in a variety of methods there, even installing it on a local device, such as a powerful phone. Also, reports have just come out that they never protected their database. And so security firms have found ways to access the database of DeepSeek and all of the chat history and such of that interaction, which comes to show you problems with privacy in AI, problems once they get to market, privacy problems, very big security concerns. So this is a fast-paced industry. It's moving quickly. There's a lot to keep up with, but at the same time, I hope that we can continue to find a way to balance innovation with safety. And that's what one of the things we'll be talking about today on our interview with Brooke is how do we trust these LLMs with our data? And how do we get correct information from our chat responses, or if we're using any kind of RAG or vector storage, how can we make sure that the responses we're getting back are accurate to the thousandth degree? And that's some of the stuff that the interview that we have today will be talking about. Before we get into that, I want to shout out my AI agent course. Again, this is an introduction to AI agents, and I am heavily working on it nights and weekends, consuming as much content as possible, utilizing all my latest skills to give you all the general understanding of databases, APIs, RAG, vector, and then how to use these agents in many different platforms, some for consumer facing, some for business facing, to help you learn the latest of building AI agents. This is a really fun course, and what you're going to be able to build at the end of it is going to be very impressive. I'm really excited about it. I think it's going to be one of the best courses that I have yet. Pre-sales are open now. I'm going to include a link to the course and a coupon code to save $50 on the course in the description of this podcast. And so I'm going to be teaching you how to build core components to maybe just an email agent that you can use in many different agents that are calling those agents and many other things. The endless possibilities are incredible for this kind of course. I'm going to be using platforms like Lindy.ai. Lazar is going to be another one of the platforms we talk about, another great product, and some other things. So we have a lot of great products and platforms that I'm going to be teaching you with the latest concepts for building AI agents. Check it out. I don't think you're going to regret it. Again, pre-sales are open now. Course launches March 1st. So get in there and check it out. Until then, let's get on with the interview. And here I am with Brooke, the co-founder of InFactory. Brooke, thank you for joining the podcast.
Very happy to be here.
So you have a tremendous background, Google, Salesforce, Humane, now the co-founder of InFactory. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, I am a longtime veteran of the software industry. I feel like I've had the privilege of working for some of the best names in tech, both at times when they were large conglomerates like Salesforce and Google. I also got to be at Slack prior to Slack being part of the broader Salesforce family. I like to joke that Mark Benioff pops into my life more than you might expect. I've worked for 3 companies now that have had some Mark Benioff affiliation. I got my start kind of in an untraditional way. I'm not a programmer. I'm not an engineer by training. I always joke that I was a history major. And so when I asked to give life advice to future college grads and they ask me about major choices, I'm always a little bit dismissive of whether that really matters in the long run. But I'd always been really interested in where the internet was going. Social media was on the rise when I was in college. There was a huge shift away from folks seeing computer science as sort of this niche, nerdy field, kind of being the hot field that everybody wanted to get into. And so I was lucky enough to get a job with a startup right out of school that was actually building Facebook applications. So when I tell people that who are Gen Z or younger, they kind of give me a blank stare. But things like FarmVille and that nature, we were doing that for enterprises who wanted to kind of figure out what their social media strategy was. Google Plus was, a relevant social network at the time. And that company was a company that got acquired by Salesforce, which is how I ended up there and had the privilege of learning really all of the ins and outs of the universe of CRM and SaaS and kind of the best of the best when it came to their sales and go-to-market team. As I mentioned, after that, I was able to be part of the founding Asia Pacific team with Slack. So Slack, still a nascent business in the US when I joined, very much a nascent business in Asia Pacific. And so that was sort of my first almost 0 to 1, in some ways like -1 to 1 experience. I was at Google working on the Android stack for a number of years. And
And like strategic partnerships there?
yes, yes. So I was focused on particularly partnerships with Samsung and the large OEMs who rely on the Android OS to
Cool.
be their operating system of choice. This is always very ironic now because my co-founder at InFactory is one of the original iPhone creators, that his name is on many of the key patents for the iPhone. So I still troll him with my Samsung phone. And it was at Google where I actually got the recruiting outreach to join what was then a very stealth and very secretive startup, which was Humane. And largely because, as you probably know, Humane was building a device that was focused on replacing traditional smartphones. So, obvious intersection with my background related to OEMs and the telco world and the OS world. And that was also where I got kind of my full exposure to all things AI, because Humane was really on the cutting edge when it came to LLMs and where the future was headed in the generative AI space.
That's incredible. What a great history. Let's stay on Humane for a little bit because I think most of our listeners know Humane for many reasons. It was the hottest thing for a second. And like the promotions, the advertising, the commercial, the branding, man, it was so on point. It was really cool. And it's still a great product.
Yeah, it's a product you can buy today. It's very much still an existing company. I don't know if you've ever seen the pin in action or had a chance to use it.
I think it's one of those trailblazers that was like, okay, a new form factor, a new technology, let's really give it a go. And they had the best of the best team seemingly, work
They
on
did.
this type of interface, beautiful hardware. How was that experience? Like the ups and downs with that. Can you share a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. What drew me to Humane from the jump was team. The folks who were involved with this project were truly some of the smartest, most talented people I've ever met. I've had the privilege to work for some really impressive companies, which have had impressive people, and Humane was sort of in a tier of its own. That was where I met Ken, who is obviously a pretty critical part of the InFactory story.
Who's your
And
co-founder now?
yes, my co-founder now, co-founder and CTO. And Ken, as I mentioned, deeply part of the lore and history of iOS and iPhone. He's the original engineer on the Safari web browser. He invented the iPhone keyboard and autocorrect. And so, just the fact that someone like that is just walking around and I, get to spend every day with him
Yeah.
kind of shows you why the team itself was such a big part of that story and that experience.
Yeah.
I think the other piece of it is also just getting to experience firsthand, sort of well ahead of the broader enterprise space, where AI was going from a generative perspective. And
Yeah.
the fact that, Sam Altman was an investor in Humane, Azure and Microsoft were investors. There was a lot of energy around where LLMs were going to have this major breakthrough. And this was pre-ChatGPT. So people at this point do not see LLMs as this household name. They don't know what OpenAI is generally, unless you're like very deeply embedded in the industry. And so a big exciting part of what drew me to that kind of work and what drew me then to what we're focused on now is just seeing these capabilities and getting sort of the jump on where this all was going to head and what the opportunities were.
Yeah. At what point did you leave that company and figure out, hey, Ken, let's go start our own company? How did that happen?
Yeah, I think if you talk to many entrepreneurs, I think what most entrepreneurs will tell you is that what was their light bulb moment was something that they saw as this glaring problem or this challenge that they just felt very drawn to solve and felt like they had the skills to help solve it. In my case, it was in collaboration on working with some enterprise opportunities where LLMs were being utilized as a way to do things like help baristas who are serving coffee and being able to access menu data or customer data, opportunities with healthcare systems for clinicians and practitioners to be able to pull up patient data or get into patient files using LLMs of the operating system of choice. Those kinds of use cases were super compelling. And I think for us, like where we felt like the industry should be going, that like there was sort of, if you think of the waves of LLM technology, first wave is very much, a chatbot. Second wave is sort of this idea of, it can do summarization and this very human-like writing experience, content creation. Everyone's on Midjourney making avatars of themselves looking like characters from the Avengers, whatever. That's all very exciting and compelling, but it's not going to be the thing that justifies the trillions of dollars of money that's being thrown at AI. And I think what Ken and I realized together working on some of these enterprise projects was there is a missing piece to the technical infrastructure of AI that is making it difficult for enterprises to actually get real value from LLMs and generative AI capabilities. And if we could help close that gap, then that was going to be something that was really going to help drive the industry forward. And so I think for us, it really comes down to seeing the problem, feeling like we had a position on how to solve it and wanting to work on it together. So we left Humane in the spring of 2024 and started the company not too long after that.
Can you tell us what it does?
Yeah. So InFactory is the platform of choice for enterprises who are looking for ways to build trustworthy AI solutions.
Okay.
And I also like to say it's also the platform of choice for AI that can help you with billion-dollar decisions. So, we're talking about critical workflows that are more than just, as I mentioned before, some of the early use cases. And I think where many of the enterprises, at least in our experience, are trying to take AI is how can this actually pay off as far as the investment we've made so far in being able to use this technology in ways that go far beyond sort of the basic blocking and tackling that we've been able to achieve thus far. And what that means at a more specific level is that we are very focused on accuracy, trust, and repeatability. So we have created a platform where we have abstracted away the complexity of achieving a lot of those elements within building AI solutions.
Mm-hmm.
We're trying to open that up more broadly to the larger enterprise.
And is this like a more protected LLM that you use? Like, what does it look like?
Yeah. So really the end user experience is very much focused on the developer experience. There are kind of different personas within that, because we built a platform, but we are sitting between the tech stack of LLMs and, whatever other, if you're using like a RAG based tool or a
Hmm.
vector database or anything like that to build some of your AI applications and use cases. We are the platform that enables the final step to get you to actual deployment. So the way that I break that down is that one of the biggest things that will define whether we're going to be able to get much value from AI in the enterprise is data. And I think everyone's
Hmm.
pretty aware of that now, that data is
Hmm.
the new oil, and who has data, what quality that data is, how data is going to be shared between different parties in order to build the solutions that they're looking for. So a big part of our solution is about how do you connect to those data sources, both your first party data as well as being able to potentially access third party data and share that in a private and secure way. The second piece is about query generation and being able to build queries that are actually deterministic by nature. So if you think about most of the current attention in the AI space is on LLMs, which are probabilistic, we want to remove that layer of sort of risk for anything where close enough isn't going to be good enough. That you need to have a query where you know that every time you ask that query, you're going to get the same result. There's no chance of hallucination, and you're able to potentially troubleshoot because you have a view into how a query had been created. That's all in kind of our build experience. And then lastly is really on the deploy side. So whether that's deploying that as an API endpoint, whether that's building a dashboard, building an agent, however, folks want to do that, we're building the tool set for kind of that final stage for people to interact with the technology.
Gotcha. Now, most of my audience, they're aware of tools like N8N, where you have that agent, you have some kind of RAG and some kind of vector, you ask it information or you send it information, it digests, and then when you chat with it, it gives you that information back. Now, would you be kind of like that middleman where when it gives you that information back, it checks that information for to make sure that there's no hallucinations or anything like that, and then returns it? Or are you also part of that chat retrieval process?
We're part of the retrieval process ourselves. So we're actively not doing RAG. We
Okay.
are very much focused on our own proprietary methodology, but that's a big part of our secret sauce, if you will, and the
Okay.
IP of the company and what Ken's been focused on, which is an alternative to RAG. I think that RAG has its place, particularly for less precise use cases, but we focus a lot of our attention on things like financial services and media and healthcare and industries where the small variabilities of RAG can present challenges.
Hmm.
I had a customer I was talking to in financial services the other day that was talking about how they need precision down to the thousandth decimal point. That level of precision is really hard to do, even with tools like a RAG based solution.
Hmm.
So for us, it's not that we are verifying the output, it is that the output will be correct by design based on the architecture of our solution.
Gotcha. And now with your solution, are you allowing companies to embed essentially documentation, all the stuff there, and then from there they chat with that, and then you get them more accurate information? Or how does that your solution take in the information to then return it in a successful way?
Yeah. So it's a combination of, like I said, for the first party data, which is if you are an enterprise, you're going to have your Snowflake database or your
Okay.
Postgres, or, maybe it's something like your Post Hog, product analytics. You also will probably want third party information from things like news sources, where we're,
Hmm.
announcing some interesting partnerships there to enrich your answers and provide greater context.
Yeah.
And so that is where we are focused as far as the data layer and bringing in both what is proprietary and owned by the companies themselves, and helping them find value in that data, which is
Hmm.
a big part of the current focus. And I'm sure you've seen many companies talking about how do we unlock what has largely been sort of this promise of big data, but now
Hmm.
AI is allowing that in a way that it hasn't before. We're focused on that piece of it for highly complex data sets. Most of like the end user experiences are coming from data science heavy use cases, hedge fund use cases where they're thinking through their proprietary algorithms and they want to be able to use that in conversation with the data that's coming in, where our technology really has value.
Are there any kind of like playbooks or anything that or learnings that you're using from like Humane or other companies where it's like we saw how this worked out. We're going to try it differently in this approach with InFactory.
Yeah, 1,000%. I mean, going back to the origin story of what we saw as the problem, I think one of my key insights was there is this DIY experience going on right now where there's a lot of noise in the ecosystem. There is an understanding that tools like a RAG-based tool or a vector database or vector search, whatever, is going to potentially move the needle a bit as far as accuracy and precision, but it's not a silver bullet type solution. And there's also just a lot of smoke and mirrors, to be honest. Like there's a
Mhm.
lot of solutions where, having been on the front lines of this tech and kind of really knowing like at the frontier level what it can do, I'm often a little skeptical of some of the promises. And we often say we're the anti-hype, anti-BS AI company because we've lived it. What we have been trying to do is make all of those various sort of like science experiment type versions of products that people have tried to bring together and really simplify that and combine that with the fact that we have some key insights about what does and doesn't work when you're trying to get truly accurate inputs from generative AI systems.
Gotcha. Ken has a history of hardware and a little bit of you as well. In that way?
So his background at Apple was very much software focused when you consider that he was building iOS. So he is
Sure.
not a hardware engineer by training. And his focus area, even prior to this on the AI side, was wholly on LLM orchestration, thinking through how to build an OS, basically just using LLMs.
Hmm.
In Humane's case, hardware was the vision that they had as far as how they wanted to deploy the software that they built. If you've actually followed any of the recent Humane news, there's been a lot of conversation about the software now, and they've kind of moved more into that direction with less
Mm,
emphasis on AI pin specifically. So to me, it's all kind of
yeah.
part of the broader story.
Yeah. By the way, side note, with Humane, I think the pin might eventually come back, but I think they were just so early. And it was like some of the technology itself was early, but you got to love those forward thinkers. I mean, they really did a lot of innovation with that. To put the technology that they put in that pin was just incredible.
Yeah, completely. I mean, hardware is so hard.
Yeah.
Like to have the balls of people to basically as a startup company with kind of the research, supply chain and manufacturing and all of the other complexities that come from building hardware. The only companies that really do that are massive
Yeah.
corporations. And so to do it as a startup, you have to respect the audacity. And I think it's important that companies are still trying to do that. We
Yeah.
haven't really seen a major hardware breakthrough
Yeah.
in the wearable AI space in a while. The closest maybe would be Meta's Ray-Bans, which are
Yeah.
a great product,
It's a
but
good step forward.
so to me, I have the Meta Ray-Bans. I love
Yeah.
them. They're very much a continuation of existing form
Yeah.
factors. And I don't think they've really solved the AI use case for them either. I can speak from experience. I do not use any of the AI features on the Ray-Bans. I use the camera and some other things, but I don't think anyone's cracked the code yet on AI
Yeah.
hardware. And it'll be interesting when that happens because I strongly believe that Humane will have laid the groundwork for many of those innovations.
Back to InFactory, I believe it's launch week for you guys or soon thereof. Can you tell me
Yes.
a little bit about what that's going to look like and some next steps for InFactory as you guys get live and what the users or community can expect from you going forward?
Yeah, for sure. So up until now, we've been working primarily hand in hand with design partners, large enterprise to kind of build out in partnership
And
what
that's your
are
background.
exactly that's my bread and butter. And I think a common playbook for startups to first test the waters with larger companies that can give feedback as to what features matter, what the user experience needs to look like. This next phase for us is really about how do we cultivate the best developer experience that we can and really engaging with that community more holistically. And I think we've built that solution with developers in mind. So there's going to now be an opportunity to actually have a pricing tier for developers. We are doing a product hunt launch that will be announced fairly soon. I'm so excited to see, getting some buzz out there, but for going directly to where those people tend to be. And we've also been trying to really focus on how do we then iterate with user feedback from developers. The velocity of product development, as you'd imagine for a startup, is always fun. And
Mm,
our product becomes obsolete usually within hours
mm,
after I've posted about it on LinkedIn or
mm.
taken a video of it to send to a potential customer.
Especially,
And I'll have found out that they've already changed something and we've already like moved the ball forward. So what makes me excited about that is that working directly with the folks that are actively building in this space themselves and interacting with them more directly means I think the feedback loop between us and the community is going to be really fun.
Is it going to be like a primary B2B play in the beginning, or is this something where any developer can get their hands on and start accessing?
This will be so with the next phase we're entering, any developer can get their hands on. So the intent is, Product Hunt will be sort of a launch moment for us with that cohort and that persona. And now, we will basically like at the very basic level, you can use InFactory in order to build whatever applications you're looking to create.
With critical, accurate information coming back to you.
Exactly.
Fantastic. So this industry is moving fast. Before the podcast, we were joking about DeepSeek, and in the best of ways, like it's moving fast. It's bringing a lot of change and a lot of good things to the industry. Also, there's a lot of worries about privacy, hallucinations, InFactory solving some of that. But how do we continue to move forward with AI and like trust AI with our privacy, our deepest secrets, the things that are all of our data? Like what does that look like for us as people that want to use this to help them in all aspects of life, AI, LLMs, et cetera? But like how can we trust our data with these companies? Is that it? I know it's a big answer or a big question.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the way that I've looked at it for some time is that we had this technology sort of thrust upon us in a time that I don't think people weren't even expecting. Even the big players weren't expecting.
Mhm.
Google was sort of caught on the back foot when ChatGPT burst onto the scene. And my experience interacting with both the consumer side and my Humane role, as well as the enterprise, was that people were just very unprepared, right? And the level in which people then were playing catch up for basically the last 2 years has meant that we've honestly made a lot of mistakes as an industry, and there's been a lot of sort of trying to not put the genie back in the bottle, because I don't think anyone actually wants that. I think people see the promise of this, and like I said, I think we as a
Yeah.
company and myself personally, I am glad that this is now more widespread and adoption has really skyrocketed. But there's been many cycles of technology like this where a technology comes out, it completely changes the paradigm, but legislation is behind, enterprise is behind, our understanding of consequences as a society are behind. The technology is usually out in front.
Yeah.
And so, what I am optimistic about in the last, let's say 6 months, is that I do feel like that catch up has happened where people now recognize that it is not best practice, certainly, to just dump all their company secrets into a chat with an LLM. I think people have recognized that it's also not in their best interest to sell all of their data to an LLM. And so a lot of the innovation I'm seeing in this space, being pretty close to it and spending a lot of time with other founders and customers and hearing what's going on, is really focused on how do we put the right guardrails around this technology. I think some of the most interesting winners in the AI space will be those that are wholly focused on things like explainability, observability, and privacy.
Hmm.
And I think that's exciting. I think it's nice when it aligns well with the incentives to create exciting, innovative businesses that also support good outcomes for users and society as a whole.
Yeah. It's a tough one. I know Apple is still trying to figure out how they're going to really approach AI. They've taken a slower approach than others. The last 2 years, people were caught off guard. And so it's created this frenzy. And I think because of such, there's been a lot of rapid deployments without, just trying to stay caught up or get caught up with maybe not the proper precautions that this kind of tooling might have needed as well in that phase.
It's actually been an interesting recruiting aspect because I talk to a lot of candidates who are experienced AI ML practitioners, many of whom have been in the industry before generative AI was a concept. Some of them will tell me, I used to be considered an ML engineer, a data scientist, but I've been rebranded. Now I'm an AI expert. And you see all these job headcounts for generative AI expert, and you're like, the industry of generative AI is basically just a few years old. So it's not really possible unless you were
Yeah.
on the DeepMind team.
Yeah.
But what I do find interesting is that so many of the people that come to us who are drawn into our mission, our values, the problem we're trying to focus on are like, yes, this is what the industry needs. Because what I'm seeing wherever I am in my seat at whatever large company or enterprise is just a lot of people throwing spaghetti at the wall and hoping for the best. And I'm happy to see that like the industry, in terms of its talent and expertise, seems to be rallying around a bit around this idea that there's going to need to be infrastructure and policies and different ways of thinking about this technology than sort of what the last 2 years have been. So I'm hopeful that it's not too late. That there's still a lot of work to be done, and there's so much energy and motivation to make AI be successful that, and not just successful but beneficial. That it makes me feel hopeful when some of the top talent in this space is telling me that, like, yes, that, like, where I want to be focused on is not necessarily just pushing frontier models forward, but it's actually making all of this safer and more accessible for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, safe has to be the number one thing for all companies because the rapid innovation that we're seeing and everything that is possible means, like, in 3 5 years time, like, what is that going to look like? I mean, if there's going to be AGI there, and then if there is AGI there, what safety measures are in place? Like, we're starting to get into a place where I don't think maybe humanity's been before, and there's a lot of unknowns, and it's moving very quick, like faster than ever before.
Completely. The one thing I'll say is, having had a front row seat to the industry, is that as much as you hear leaders saying, "Oh, we're months away from AGI," or look at what these autonomous agents are doing, I would argue we have a little time. We don't have infinite time,
Sure.
and I think the events of this week with DeepSeek showing how much they were able to accomplish with a lot less compute and resource constrained, however you want to view what they're telling us versus what might be reality. The fact is that it is accelerating. There's a horizon that is at least visible where we really will have to consider the implications of AI systems that are acting completely without human input. But we do have a little time. I often say, in some ways, when you consider the grand history of technology, and my history major coming back, we're closer to the very immature phases of AI than we are to the mature ones. That is still on the long view, which means that it's kind of up to us, right?
Mhm.
This is the time to be talking about these things and to not shy away from it. I would say it's also where the fact that there's a lot of evidence that the models are plateauing and we're kind of in this, what they're calling kind of the post-training age. That's not something that I find alarming. In fact, I
Sure.
see it as positive.
Yeah,
I think
agreed.
I think I think it's good for the industry to think, okay, we've already sucked up basically all the data that we possibly can. We can't. It's not Moore's law. The models are not just going to suddenly be like exponentially better every time they come out. So, given that, what does that mean for how this technology is going to progress towards something truly autonomous or AGI or however we want to think about
Mhm.
it? And now there's more incremental changes, which means we also have more control over them.
Yeah.
I don't know if you agree with that. I know a lot of people feel like, oh, well, AGI might be next week, and
Mm.
I could be totally wrong.
I feel like the goalposts are constantly moving for AGI, so it's really hard to know. But I do feel like within the next 5 years, I feel like it's got to be here, just because of the innovation rate that we've seen in a year or two. But I just hope that whenever that time comes, we have responsible people at the helm, uh, doing the
Yeah.
best that they can to keep it safe and measured for all.
Yeah. Well, and another example why I think it's only a good thing, players in the space, that there isn't a single winner. I think that's a good thing for industry generally.
Sure.
There's been very defined winners for basically like the last decade.
Hmm.
And we're now kind of in a new cycle where it's not that I am naive enough to believe that there's not going to be some of the same power players involved. The new order will naturally be better than the old one, but we're still in a phase where it hasn't been decided. We can't quite see who's going to take it all at the end. And that gives us some opportunity for saying, okay, let's decide, you know, where we want to lay our bets, and should those bets be on the companies that care about security and privacy and safety.
For our listeners out there that are interested in tech, but maybe haven't adopted it into their daily lives yet, do you have any recommendations for those folks of like taking that first steps towards using AI on a daily basis for their professional careers?
The advice I always give is start by using an LLM like a OpenAI or an Anthropic, or what a tool of choice. As we're finding, they're commoditized more and more. So use an LM and use it for something that you are an expert in, which is probably your job, and sort of test the bounds of its knowledge based on your ability to assess how good it is relative to your own expertise.
Hmm.
And I think that that's a good first step in being able to kind of understand both the opportunities and the limits
Hmm.
of this technology, because I think it would make people less afraid. For the topics that I am an expert on, I still wouldn't trust an LM to just
Sure.
put out the output. I'm
Sure.
impressed by some of the ways that it can help me, but I'm not afraid right now that it's going to replace my job.
Mhm.
I think it helps give people sort of a balanced perspective to start from as to where this technology is and where it feels magical and amazing, and also where it's still not quite a full replacement for a human in the loop type of experience.
As we wrap up here, any thoughts that you want to give to the audience about InFactory, how they can help, what they can expect, anything going forward?
Yeah, definitely. So, like I said, we will have a product hunt launch coming out. So, if you're a product hunt user, would love your support to get some visibility and traction because I think that will only help with broader visibility on issues of trust and accuracy. If you're someone that cares about trust and accuracy in this space, we're a company where that's the core of our entire ethos. Happy to have people who share that philosophy. We also have some other interesting announcements coming from a partnership perspective, as I mentioned. So keep a lookout for those. We're looking for feedback, people that are, passionate about building an AI. And so if that describes you, please visit infactory.ai. You can sign up for participating in our beta there and otherwise keep up to date on what we're building.
Great. I will put the links to the resources in the description of this podcast. Otherwise, thank you for joining us this week in No Code Plus AI. It's been a pleasure.
Wonderful. Thank you.
So that's really cool to be able to speak to someone like Brooke with her level of experience, starting with Salesforce, Slack, Google, Humane, and now starting her own gig. It's great to see another woman like this trailblazing in the AI and technology industry and building a solution that is very much needed. As we talked about at the top of the show, DeepSeek having privacy concerns of themselves of not locking down their database. I think as these usages of LLMs continue to happen, privacy focused information plus the information that you're getting back being accurate is going to be paramount, especially with LLMs becoming commodities. Can you get me accurate stuff that I can put my job on the line? And if I give you my job data, is this data going to be secure and safe? A lot of those things have to be addressed still. We're still a little bit in the wild, wild west of LLMs and much more. But otherwise, I hope you enjoyed the interview. And I'll put all of our resources and links in the description of this podcast. Otherwise, tune in for next week because we have another fantastic episode for you planned. Until then, stay safe, stay secure, build some AI agents, explore, have fun, and I'll see you next week.